Hello and welcome to the Financial Wellness Hour. I am your host, Hirsch Sermon, and I'm thrilled to have you here today on the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. It goes for those wanting to learn more about creating financial wellness, and we will be taking different life cycles and exploring them financially and emotionally, because personal finances are usually not about the money, believe that or not, rather about the emotions associated with your finances. Our goal is to look at how to prepare for these life cycles and thrive on the other side. Although we might have a theme for each show, I can assure you the financial strategies we talk about are applicable to many situations that you will face. Although we have fairly general discussions, we'd love to hear from you to make it more personal and relevant. So please do call in, or you can reach me through my website, lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. So going solo means different things to different people. It could be divorce, love, loss of a loved one, perpetual bachelorhood, and I'm sure there are a myriad of other ways that we can look at it as well. And we do plan on covering all of these, just not on today's show. So please do tune in, listen to future shows as we cover these topics. And again, please share your thoughts on what you'd like to learn more about. Today, we're going to focus mainly on divorce. How do we prepare for? How do we thrive beyond? And more specifically, the various approaches of getting divorced. We kind of lump divorce into one category or one approach, but there are different ways. We can go from the kitchen table to court and a few ways in between. So we're navigating unprecedented times, as everybody knows, and understanding how a divorce impacts your life today, during the process, and beyond is so vitally important. My guest today is Sandra Crawford from Crawford Law, and is well-versed in a lot of the paths in how you can approach your divorce. I'm going to give a quick hand because today, or this year anyway, is celebrating 30 years of practice. And I would say stellar practice, not just practice, and has shared tremendously through being an instructor at Northwestern University's mediation program. So with many other talents, I'd like to welcome you, Sandra, to the show. I really appreciate you joining us.
I'm glad to be here, Hirsch. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. You and I have known each other for a little bit now. We've actually done other podcasts together and things like that. And I know from interacting with you personally that your personal experiences are major motivators in your career. Can you share a little bit, how did you get into family law? Share a little bit about your experiences in the courtroom, how your focus might have changed. I think understanding a little bit of your journey will help everybody understand the passion behind helping others and through, what you've done through difficult times when other people are facing adversity.
Well, I hope I can teach by do what I didn't do. Don't make the mistakes I did. So 35 years ago, January 1985, I went to law school. In the middle, I was married. I just had twin daughters that September in '84. And so I had 4-month-old twins. I went to law school and I also needed a job. And the marriage suffered. So in the middle of law school, I went through a personal divorce, but I was very lucky. I'm here in Chicago, Cook County, Illinois. And they had at that time just established a mediation program. So my spouse and I went through mediation, and I got the bug for it, even though mediation at that time wasn't taught in law schools. I was lucky then to take my mediation training here in Chicago at the Center for Conflict Resolution, which was one of the foremost community mediation programs. So I had the personal experience of being a client in mediation, and then I went on to take mediation training, which just wasn't available in the law schools. I mean, it may have been covered in like a sub chapter for about a half an hour. So I had the personal experience of mediation, and then I took mediation training in '93, '94, and I loved it. But at that point in time, it was volunteer. I did a lot of volunteer mediation, so I had a great background in how to mediate. And at that point in time, I was building my practice. I went to work for a law firm that did mainly mechanic lien foreclosure, working with contractors and owners when they get into trouble. And that can be as bad as a bad divorce. Because it brings out people's emotions. It's about, the roof over your head. But I got, as the junior associate, I got all the divorce work that came in. So I started to preach what I called then preventative law. And I did not know there was actually a theory around preventative law under the umbrella of alternative dispute resolution. So alternative dispute resolution is this big umbrella. There's litigation, and then there's all these alternatives. So I would start to explore, there was a big push for, preventative medicine back then. I was like, can we not have some preventative law? So that kind of took me on my journey. So when I went into solo, as the children aged, I needed to have my own firm because I needed a lot more flexibility to raise children. So I started to do more and more divorce work. So in 2002, when the collaborative training, so collaborative practice or collaborative law, or what we call in Illinois collaborative process, when the training for that came here through the ADR community, through professionals like myself who promoted mediation for clients, I took that training because that's a mediation-based, the skills you use in mediation, you carry them over into collaborative practice. So that's kind of like my journey. And 18 years later, I've been very involved in the growth of the collaborative community here. So I was president of the Collaborative Law Institute several years ago. We worked on getting there's uniform legislation now around collaborative practice because it's a very stylized form of what we call limited scope representation, where attorneys are in the case only for settlement purposes. And if the case goes to litigation, then you pass it on to litigators. And I've litigated, for 25 years, I've litigated family cases, and I will tell you, that there's horror stories. Even the best litigation, people end up, spending a lot of money, spending a lot of time, and don't come out of the process with the skills that they need, especially if they have children, to continue the relationship. So I always say to clients when I do intake is, there will be a point when you're no longer spouses, but you will always be parents, right? You can't have children. So you need to make sure that you're preserving that relationship and you're preserving the good things in the relationship. When you go through litigation, it's positional. It's A versus B, right, and then you need a judge to tell you that. And most judges, and I think this is true, at least in the community I work in, most judges will say, family court judges, whoever well-meaning, they will say, we don't want to solve your problems. We want you to solve your problems. The law is there. The law is kind of the common denominator. And yes, it's a legal status. When you get married, you commit to a contract, even though you might consider death to his part, sickness and health, all of those anymore. But it is a contract and it is a legal status that comes with a lot of benefits. When you're divorcing, in most places around the world, you're not divorced until a judge or a court says you're divorced. But how you become divorced is the conversation that I'd like to have about, what process are you choosing? When do you choose it? What's your budget for your divorce, right? There's the emotional divorce, the financial divorce, the legal divorce. How much education have you got around those things? So hopefully that's more than you want.
No, that's great because it actually sets up a lot of the questions that I have follow up for all of this we're going to touch. So, so I appreciate you kind of setting the stage because as we go through some of the questions, I think that'll be helpful as well. And just before we do, I just want to point out, I think it's so important. A lot of people go to court thinking, I'm going to get my pound of flesh. I'm going to be vindicated. And the truth is, you really are not, unfortunately. It's not this all of a sudden you've reached your utopia of satisfaction. It really doesn't happen that way. It's not a panacea of all ills. And I say to my clients, I say to everybody, this is not the last chapter in your life. It's the first chapter in the rest of your life. And if you go through an ugly divorce, you go through court, you air the dirty laundry, it doesn't bode well for that co-parenting and everything else that's going to happen. So I think that's very important. And I mentioned there are several different ways or approaches that you can go through a divorce, as we kind of titled this, kitchen table or court, and there are definitely ways in between. Can you elaborate a little bit on the different approaches that people can take? maybe kind of pretend we're a client or something and say, well, share your alternatives, if you can just elaborate a little bit for us as well.
So if you were before March 2020, if you were in my office, if we're together physically, I have kind of like a spiel, so to speak, because education is really important. And if you've never been divorced before, it's like I say to folks, divorce is a journey, right? You're going from being married, from living in one house, to not being married, to going solo maybe, but with parents and still having to communicate about your children. So it's would you set out on a journey without like looking at the map, deciding where you want to go? Do you want to take the bus? Do you want to take a train? Do you want to go on a slow boat, a fast boat? So getting educated before, when you start to make that decision about divorce, if you don't know anything about divorce, you need to ground yourself in, what does that mean? Like most people say, I want to be divorced, and they see, I just want this over. I want the pain to stop. I want the frustration, maybe the conflict in the house, the impact on the children. I want it to stop, but it's how are you going to get there? What means are you going to get there? So I would show you, sorry, I didn't get this to you early enough to put it. So I would show you something like this, which is your conflict resolution options. I hope your guests can see this, right? So we start over here, right? This side, at the kitchen table. If you can sit together at your kitchen, literally at your kitchen table, hopefully when the children are not at home, do it at a time, because most divorces, by the time you get to making the decision, or one partner has made the decision and the other hasn't, it's usually people have stopped communicating, or the conflict is so high that you can't just sit down and have a chat. What are we doing? Where are we going? So if you can sit at the kitchen table and get yourself some education, sit at the kitchen table and talk about your finances, your children, your future, your short-term goals, your long-term goals. But most people can't do that, right? The irony of divorce is at a time when you're going to be called on to talk at a very high level about a lot of important things for your future and your children's future and your family's future, you've stopped talking. So unfortunately, most people can't do that. A lot of people can, and we never see those people in our office because they sit down, they write out agreements, they make agreements, and then they either go what we call pro se, where they represent themselves, or they call an attorney and just have that attorney on a limited scope basis draft up the documents. Those cases are out there, but we don't see them. The next thing is mediation. So mediation is where if the parties can talk, they need somebody to facilitate. They need a neutral to sit with them. So if I can show this again, so that's this option here, right? The parties, are now at a table, hopefully a round table, and they're sitting with somebody who is not a judge, who is not going to make decisions, but is going to help facilitate the conversation in a neutral way so the parties can make decisions. And mediation is, time limited, very issue specific, future focused, and cost conscious. Because when you're talking, and you can speak better to this, Hirsch, because you're the financial person, right? You're talking about your own money. A judge is not going to create a pile of money. And the more you fight about money, the less money you're going to have. Right. And do you know how to budget? Do you know what what's in your retirement account? Do you know how much debt you have? Do you, if you college age kids or kids who are coming up on college, or that's one of the values of your family, that you want the children to go to college, where's the college savings, right? So it's all of those conversations. But a neutral, a mediator, and I'm mediation trained. I was trained with the Center for Conflict Resolution, and part of my practice is mediation. But even when I am mediating, although I'm an attorney in another role, I cannot give legal advice. Mediators should not be giving legal advice, and kind of people go, oh, we'll go to mediation because that's one-stop shopping and the mediator will tell us what to do. That's not what mediation is. Mediation. And
I want to add, if I can just quickly jump in there, because you mentioned you were trained at CCR, which is where my mediation training is as well, actually. But the thing that really shocked me going into the training, which I had no idea, was the goal of a mediator is not to give you a solution. It is to facilitate a healthy, productive conversation, moving you guys, the two parties, towards their solution. And I think that's not very well known. As you said, people go to a mediator and they think, oh, this person's trained in divorce, they're trained in all this, they might even be an attorney, they're going to tell us how this all works. And that's really not what a mediator's focus and goal is. And that is important for people to understand as well.
Yeah, because what mediation is about is self-determination. It's not, I mean, there's the adage, give a man a fish, he'll eat today, or a woman.
Right.
Teach how to fish, her to fish, they'll fish for a lifetime. They'll feed themselves for a lifetime. And that's what it is. Mediation and any of the things under the ADR, the Alternative Dispute Resolution Model, mediation, collaboration, restorative justice, peace circle, all of those are about people being empowered to make their own decisions. In the litigation model over here, in the courtroom, you say A, I say B, we go at it, the judge will tell you. The judge makes the decision about your children, about your future, about your finances. But that doesn't work in the long term, because somebody's going to come out of that and say, I lost, you won. And family law is not about winners and losers, right? You want the family, you want both parties to win and thrive and feel like they were heard, so that they can be empowered and they can feel that they made a decision, that their voice was heard. Maybe it wasn't heard during the marriage. Maybe somebody controlled the finances, but now I'm the spouse who stayed at home and raised the kids and didn't worry about the finances. Now I'm going to have to, because I'm going solo. I'm going to have to know how to balance a budget and write checks, or we don't write checks anymore, but make sure they don't get paid. Yeah, sorry, I'm old school. But
I will tell you, it's amazing when I work with people, and this is just because of the exposure, we divide and conquer responsibilities in a marriage. The last time they did pay a bill, they wrote out a check, they wrote out the envelope, they, licked the stamp, and it's changed. And there's an education in that alone that needs to take place for people to get self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm. So if you're grounded, if professionals, financial professionals, mental health professionals, legal professionals, if you're grounded in mediation skills, which are really looking at yourself as the neutral, not as the problem solver, not solving the problem for the parties, but helping them, educating them about where the power is vested. The power is vested in you to make the decision. So those skills, there was an evolution. Mediation has been around probably for 50 years. So there was an evolution in family law. In the early 90s, there was a guy in Minnesota, Stu Webb. He's just an amazing man. He was a burned out family law litigator. He said, I'm tired of this. And if you Google him, he's on YouTube. There's some great interviews with him about he was ready to give up his legal practice, because he said, I no longer want to be part of the problem. I do not want to leave families in despair, because 9 times out of 10, I might have the losing client. Next year, 9 times out of 10, I'm the winning client, and I have to take the sides. So he had been grounded in mediation skills, but was looking for a different way. And he was, looking at the British system, where they have solicitors and barristers, and the solicitors are the transactional people. So if you think about collaborative practice, it's doing a family case as a transaction. And that's what it is. You're negotiating an agreement. The old agreement, till death do us part, sickness and health, isn't working. It may never have been, fully formed, but now a new agreement. And, 95% of the cases, at least in my jurisdiction, and I think anecdotally around the world, end up in some form of an agreement. It just it depends on where. So in the collaborative process, which is over here, hopefully this will be shared on the site too, so people can see it. The professionals commit to form a team, and it's an interdisciplinary team. So you have legal professionals, mental health professionals, and financial professionals to form a network around the parties to help them renegotiate the contract and come out at the end with a parenting agreement that works, not just one that was written by a judge or written by, the last minute sitting on the courthouse steps, but one that's really well thought out, that's for your family, because you're a unique family, no matter, even if you're the 2.2 children and you have the house and the income. Every family is unique. So you need a unique agreement, and you also need an agreement that you understand, that you've bought into, so it's sustainable. I tell the story about, at one point in my career, I seemed to get just all of these, what we call post decrees. So this is where people have been divorced, They have an agreement because at the 11th hour, the judge
Sandra, I'm sorry, I got to do this. I'm going to ask you to share quickly how people can get a hold of you. Then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back to your story. Sorry.
Sorry, I about this. Yeah, you can reach me at lawcrawford.com.
Great, and the information's on the screen if anybody needs. And we're going to take a quick break just to pay some bills, and we will be right back. That was our teaser for you to stay tuned, for you to come back and listen to the story. So hold on 1 second. Hi, everybody. We are back at the Financial Wellness Hour, and this is Hirsch Sermon. We are on WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network. Our host, or our guest today, is Sandra Crawford from Crawford Law. And I am going to pick up right there, hand it back over to Sandra, because she was about to tell us one of her experiences, which I think was informative. So Sandra, take it away.
And I'm a little bit dyslexic, so it's Law Crawford, lawcrawford.com. So law is in front of my name, Law Crawford. Yeah. Okay. At one point in my career, probably about 10 years in, I got a lot of what we call post-decree. So these would have been people who had, entered agreements, maybe at the 11th hour because the judge told them so, or they ran out of money and they couldn't, have a full dress trial with a judge and witnesses. So they had these documents called marital settlement agreement, parenting agreement, but they had no idea what they'd signed up for. So they'd come in with their obligatory 23-page marital settlement agreement, and you'd go line by line. You'd say, okay, so you agreed that the children will be with you, on this holiday. How's that working? Well, it never works, and we've got different schedules, and we're not cooperating, and I can't do, and you go like, okay, so you've got this plan, which is your plan, which you bought and paid for, but you don't know what's in the plan, or it's not working, right? So we're very fortunate, I think, here in Cook County that our court system had kind of taken the lead in making sure people at least went to mediation. So we have it's 2-hour free sessions through our one of the annex of the court, the family counseling annex. So people would go and mediate, and they say, well, we tried to mediate, but it didn't work. Well, 2-hour sessions is not enough to, have a life plan, right? And you got a life planning. So this was about life planning, and people had this plan, this thing called an agreement, but they hadn't agreed to it. So it was just like client after client coming. And I think that's when I kind of started to also look as to how can I expand my mediation practice. And that's when I found collaborative. And so this work has been going on that, there was Stu Webb in Minnesota doing the work. That's where this graphic is out of Minnesota. They're in California. There was an attorney and some mental health professionals, Pauline Tessler and Peggy Thompson, a mental health professional, and they were working on it because what they were seeing in the mental health realm anyway was the devastation that the children were experiencing. So then you had generational divorces, right? And you didn't want your mom and pop's divorce because it was so bad and people were scarred and people weren't successful in their relationship. So all over kind of the country, there was this movement because mediation, it was growing, but not fast enough. I kind of describe it's like the book Horton Hears a Who. We're just a very small, those of us in the legal community who preach collaborative mediation, ADR, we're just kind of a very small part of the population. So we're just shouting up, we can change. And the systems, most of the court systems now, have some provision for mediation. It's usually only with the children's issues because it's the most important in that, you're talking about, getting to help the kids quickly, but they've been expanded now to include financial mediation. But collaborative kind of brought all that together, brought all the professionals to the table that needed to be there. Because, as I said, a divorce is not just a legal issue. There's emotional issues, there's financial issues, there's societal issues, there's, long-term impact issues. So that's what kind of like was the start of the collaborative process. But now collaborative is practiced in 24 countries around the world. I just heard we got now the 20th state to adopt the Uniform Collaborative Law Act. We adopted parts of it here in Illinois about 5 years ago. But people don't know, and they don't know that those of us who preach that are so small. And I will tell you, the pushback, Hirsch, was from within our own community, was from within our brethren at the bar. Because they were like, oh, that's not going to work because people want conflict. And I don't actually believe people want conflict. I think people want.
I agree. And it's such a different approach in the way usually you have a representation of a legal or expert of some kind. I have, and it becomes, okay, they're against each other. The neutrality of this team working for both of you and not representing, obviously, eliminates a lot of the distrust that happens in this. And I think it's very important that people understand as well, each approach needs to work for you and be the right one for you. They do come with pros and cons. Sitting around the kitchen table and agreeing to things is significantly cheaper, and you have control to say no. You go to court, and I'm not going to cover every one of them, but there are pros and cons to each one. You need to understand the process as well as the pros and cons. Going to court can be extremely expensive, and you lose control of saying no or yes because the judge does that for you. So I think those are things that people really need to understand as they go through this as well. And, hopefully people are very unfamiliar with the process, because hopefully it doesn't happen or it only happens once. Unfortunately, we do see, I'm sure you've seen more than I have, where it's a second, third, and even a fourth time I've seen once. But if somebody starts out using one approach, let's say mediation, because we've touched on that a few times, do they have to stick with that approach? How do they kind of go through that to help us understand that?
So I describe it, and because now I've had to like break it down, because I teach mediation, I've taught collaborative practice, I've taught ADR at the college level. So now I've really had to break it down and think about it. So I always describe it in terms of the people, the problem, the process. So the people include the clients, the children, the extended family, the court, the judges, the lawyers, the financial advisors, the CPAs. So what is the problem we're trying to solve for, right? And where are the people, and what is the best process? It's all about people coming to divorce, understanding they want change in their life, and they have control over it. They don't have to give over that control to attorneys or judges, right? They don't. But I think people kind of, they get nervous and about, that this is something that they can't understand. So first of all, education is key. Understand each of the processes, because some of the processes may not be for you, right? People in the early days, other attorneys who weren't adopting the ADR models would say, well, how do you know people are right for collaborative? I said, how do you know people are right for litigation? How is your client? You may prepare a client to testify, and then you get somebody on a stand in a public courtroom, and they freeze, right? And they forget their testimony about their own lives, and then they're cross-examined, grilled by the other side, and they're just petrified. So, the pros and cons are, you have to understand, first of all, what your tolerance. What are we arguing about? Are we arguing about money? Are we arguing about children? Are we arguing about, that 20 years ago, your mother wanted me to wear something at my wedding that I didn't? What are you arguing about? And some of it has to do with, this is why for the last 18 years, cross-training with mental health professionals and financial professionals has really changed my practice orientation. Because it's like, some of this, you said it. I think you said it in your introduction. Because the fight about money is sometimes not about money. It's about it's about security. Will I have a roof over my head? Will I have shoes on feet? And when people go into divorces, a lot of scarcity. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to have the retirement I thought I was going to have. My children are not going to have college funds. So there's a lot of emotion. So having an emotional professional, somebody who, the emotional professionals who practice collaborative, they're, PsyDs, LCSW. They're people who have worked with trauma, worked with addiction, worked with children, worked with mental health. So that those professionals come to this from their primary profession, just like lawyers come to being collaborative practitioners from their grounding in the law. But we're also, both parties in collaborative are represented by attorneys with the commitment of those attorneys. It's a written commitment called a participation agreement. We commit, we're not going to be your litigators. We're going to help you stick to, now, I've got confidentiality with my client, my counterpart collaborative attorney has confidentiality with their client, but we're all talking about, is this an emotional problem? Is it a financial problem? And I say to people, big secret is the legal problems are probably the easiest to resolve. We have statutes, we have laws, we've got case law, right? There's very few cases like law, real law, that's made in family law, because what you're talking about is factual.
Right. The other thing, the other thing I think that surprises people a lot is, you know, I'll be working with a couple and I'll say, I just want to make it clear, and I have to say this pretty much up front. Under the collaborative process, I cannot, as much as I'd love to, I cannot work with you after this is done. Or if you, for whatever reason, decide this is not for us and you go to a different approach, I have to step out of the picture. And they need to understand that. But it also, I think, builds the credibility that when I educate them, when I say things, there's a purpose behind it, not to side with one or the other, because I'm not getting their business anyway later on. It's really coming from a place that is neutral, that helps move them together. And I think, you know, you've touched on this very slightly, but you know, I think a lot of people say, oh, I've hired an attorney, or I've hired a financial professional. I can kind of sit back and I don't want to say relax, but sit back, they're going to do the work for me. And there's great information out on the internet, and quite honestly, there's some unreliable information out there as well. So what advice do you have for people in kind of getting familiar with that process, and touch a little bit also on their responsibilities, because they cannot sit back and say, the financial professional, the legal professional, they're going to take care of everything. They need to take control of their future. And it's not an easy situation being emotional about, in the state you are. So can you give a little advice on, for people in getting familiar and maybe some of the responsibilities that they need to take?
Well, I think first and foremost, when people are in conflict, what I've learned from my mental health professionals, when you're in conflict, you're flooded. You're not thinking straight. It is a point in your life like any other trauma. I mean, I think it's right up there, next to losing a child, like to an accident. I mean, the trauma around divorce and the trauma on the professionals also who do this work. There's some interesting work around that. But I would say the advice is to stop, breathe, just, get yourself grounded in what's my goal?
Right.
Is my goal just to have this person disappear and never see them again? Well, if you don't have any children and you're self-sufficient and you don't have any property, then that's easy. However, life isn't easy. You have children, you've got debts, you've got property together. So I think it's what I would say the first is ground yourself. Get yourself some mental health. Go into some kind of therapy or counseling or group therapy to say, what's my goal? So I know I don't want this. What is it I want? What is it I want for myself, for my family, for my future, for my relationship with this person? So it's kind of stop and get grounded, right? It's the put on the airlines, put on your own mask first.
Right.
Calm yourself. You need to calm. And unfortunately, it's not a calm time in your life. We're creatures of habit.
Yeah.
We don't like change. So if you say, okay, I want to be divorced. Well, you're divorced when a judge says you're divorced, because that's the entry of a judgment. And I don't think Hollywood or TV has done us any great service on that, because you're in the lawyer's office in the morning and you're walking out with the divorce papers in the afternoon. That doesn't happen. The trajectory of divorce litigation, at least in my county, is 18 to 24 months before COVID, before the court closed down. I think we're now talking more 36 months if you can't agree. However, knowing that you hold the key to your own future and being grounded in that and having a vision and having a plan, right? So how long do you want this to take? Do you want to rely on the court that's closed down and you're doing Zoom, and now some of the court Zooms are being Zoom bombed?
Right.
Say, I want to take some control over myself, my finances, my future, my children. Right. And a lot of times, like the mental health people will ask the clients to please vision, 10 years from now. if you're looking back, what is it that you want your children to remember about your divorce? Do you want them to remember that mom and dad were always bickering and fighting? No, that's probably why you're getting out of the divorce, out of the marriage.
Right.
So it's the, advice, stop, breathe, put your mask on, get your finances in order, get your head around what's the next step for me. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in conflict. I don't want to be with this person anymore, a person I used to love and cherish, but that's changed. Where do I want to be? Not focused on, I don't want to be here and you created it, because it's the blame and shame and, you have to fix it. Nobody's going to fix it for you except yourself. So it's a lot of self-determination and a lot of self-reflection and taking responsibility that if there's a conflict, you're part of it, right? You can't clap with one hand, right?
No, I'm loving this. I'll tell you, I love this because my entire approach when I work with a client is to prioritize, organize, simplify. So what you're saying about prioritizing, what do I want in the future? What are my goals? What are the things that I need to understand and secure? It plays in exactly with what you're saying. And, I call it a fog. When you're in divorce, you're in an emotional fog. And you need to be able to figure out, how do I see beyond that fog? Sometimes you need a professional to help you see that, whether it's the emotional side, the financial side, the legal side, whatever it might be. But I think it's very important to understand that you need to see forward. As you said, you need to understand 10 years from now what it's going to look like and work towards that. So I think those are all very, very important.
I think there's a line, it may be a biblical quote, like, without vision, the community perishes. If you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there?
Yeah.
So start with that. And I think that's not so much the law. And I think most legal practitioners who serve in the family law area, I think there's part of us that are frustrated counselors, because you end up just talking a lot of common sense to people. Right?
Yeah, I wrote a blog yesterday and I was struggling with whether I put the line in or not. It's an old adage. It says if you fail to plan, it's a plan to fail.
I think that's
so I took it out so I can say it here. I guess I don't know.
It's either Roosevelt or Benjamin Franklin. Yeah, I mean that's
it's very, very true. And I appreciate. I mean, obviously, people. I don't want to say obviously. A lot of people have heard of collaborative law. I appreciate the way you described it and in the way, because I don't think people really understand what it is. They're kind of like, when it came out, I think it was like, oh, this hippie stuff, kumbaya, let's all get together. But there's really a lot of validity and a lot of every approach that we spoke about has relevancy for some and not for others. So it doesn't mean that it's right for 100% of the time. If it's incredibly contentious, you're not going to be able to do a collaborative law approach. So people need to understand, though, the strengths of that program. And I think in general, they really didn't understand. People speak a lot about mediation. They speak a lot about court. They speak a lot about the others, but I don't think they have a full understanding. And quite honestly, I'm not sure all the practitioners within family law do either. So
the law is slow to change. We do the same thing over and over again. There is specialized training. I mean, you took 40 hours of mediation training. That's a basic training. That's just the first step. There's a lot more advanced training. Collaborative law now is a 15 to 16 hour, usually over 2 or 3 days, but that's now all changing because everything's gone virtual. The class I teach in mediation is a family law mediation class at Northwestern. I co-teach with a mental health professional, Margaret Powers, and we used to do that in a week. So we'd have financial professionals, legal professionals, emotional professionals, all in one room together. We're doing it virtually. We're starting on Thursday. It's going to be over 4 weeks, 2 nights and a Saturday, over 4 weeks. So I think there's a silver lining. I've been trying to seek this silver lining in this COVID thing. I think now that we are in a virtual world, things are going to more rapidly change here because obviously podcasts like this and a lot of public information, and people can't physically go to the courthouse, right? And so I think it is changing. But I've been saying it's been changing since '93. So yeah.
Well, if there was ever a catalyst, they always say people are averse to change. If there was ever a catalyst, yeah, I have so many other questions. We have about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to have you come back on the show another time. Before we wrap up, I'm going to ask you to do two things. One, share again your information, how people can get in touch with you. And then just a real quick 30-second last thought, something we didn't cover or just something you want to elaborate on for 30, 40 seconds.
Okay. So you can reach me just at lawcrawford.com, and you can drop in comments and I'll respond there. And I would just say that divorce is an opportunity to right the ship, to address those things in your life that are not working for you, they're not working for your family and your children. So think of it as an opportunity. And it's very difficult because there's a lot of grief and loss, and there's still a lot of stigma around divorce. But, see it as an opportunity, see it as a learning experience. You've got to ground yourself. You've got to get good information before you start out on this journey, right? You got to kind of get the map out and say, where do I want to end up? I don't want to be here, but a year from now, where do I want to end up? And what does that look like for me and for the children and for my relationship? Because you will be divorced spouses, but you'll never be divorced parents because you can't.
Right.
So that's what
I'll tell you, the very first blog I ever wrote, I first titled it, Divorce is Great, right? And then I realized that probably wasn't the best title, so I put it as perspective, but it really said my life had died. It was an excruciating death, but then I got this perspective, and I kind of did a top 10 about the opportunity that it really is, getting in touch with yourself, getting in touch with people you maybe lost touch with, learning who you are, what you love, really it really can be an opportunity. So appreciate that. I know that on the financial side, it's very easy to complicate things even more. There's so many considerations when you're going through a divorce, having the right approach, having the right professionals, all of that can really improve your outcome significantly. So Sandra, thank you again for sharing your experiences and insights and making not such easy topics sound easy. It's not an easy thing to do under any circumstances. So thank you.
Well,
I
thank
am
you guys for having me on. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Absolutely. And I would love you to reach out if you have questions for me or for Sandra Crawford. Please do reach me through lifecycle.financial. That's lifecycle.financial. Our guest next time is a college financial prep expert, help you whether you are divorced or whether you are not in how to save money through divorce. Thank you so much for tuning in. Look forward to the next show. Thank you.